And
Great.
we are recording. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Lynn,
Thank you, Lynn.
could you
So,
highlight our speaker, please?
Yes. Great. I think we're set. Thanks for that, Ed. So, welcome everyone to the final workshop in our day of pre-conference workshops for our conference, our SUNY Digital Learning Conference on the theme of educating for digital citizenship. I'm Paul Schacht. I'm in the English department at SUNY Geneseo, where I'm also director of the Center for Digital Learning. And we are privileged to have for this workshop Thembi Duncan, who's working on her MS in instructional design and educational technology at SUNY Potsdam, and is a theater practitioner and educator with over 20 years of experience synthesizing U.S. history, social justice, and theater into unique arts experiences. She's going to lead a workshop on an arts-based toolkit for creating dynamic multimedia history projects. So, Thembi, we're thrilled that you're here and excited about your workshop. Thanks to everyone who's joined to participate in the workshop. Thanks also to our sign interpreters and to Lynn Ann at SUNY CPD and to co-organizer Ed Beck. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Thembi, to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you for welcoming me. And I'm really, really excited to meet with you all today. Please forgive me. I have a separate monitor here, and I pulled up the PowerPoint, and then it kind of locked on me. So I'm just give me 1 second. I'm going to close it and open it back up, and then we will be back on track. In fact, I will just disconnect. I'm glad it happened now and not while I was in the middle of sharing the screen. So, okay. So, 1 second, bear with me. Okay. Yeah, uh-oh. It's literally, okay. I'm gonna make it's locking up on me and I don't know why. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a different document. I'm going to pull a PDF of it because I have it as a PDF. Maybe PowerPoint just doesn't like me right now. Sorry, everybody, but I don't want to waste your time. I'm going to pull that up. Okay, are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sweet. Thanks, everybody, for your patience. You all were so patient and lovely while I struggled with technology, which is so ironic, right? Given what we're talking about. So, okay, let's jump in. So this is an arts-based toolkit for creating dynamic multimedia history projects, but I want to talk first a little bit about where we're going to go with this. So let's go over our agenda. We're going to do an introduction and overview. Then I'm going to do a presentation, talk about my information literacy toolkit. That's sort of the first step to identifying primary sources and using them in this way that I'll show you. Then we'll conduct a brief script analysis on a primary source text. We will then use principles of drama to tell a story. We'll do an activity, and then we will wrap up. That's what we'll be doing today in our session. Okay, so a little bit about me. The whiteboard that I am holding gives you a sense of the things that are important to me in terms of my foundation and where I come from with my artistic work. I've spent about 25 years now being an arts practitioner, specifically in theater, but in other areas as well. And a lot of what is surrounding me in this mind map is just the work that I do and the things that I am interested in and the way that history, culture, and identity shows up in my work. So I thought I would share that with you all as a way to just get a sense of how I use the arts to teach various content areas and help folks understand concepts of arts integration with other content and growing your knowledge and your skill sets in art forms while also developing your knowledge in other content areas. So that's my area of expertise. So objectives today are going to be to practice an arts-based approach for gathering and verifying primary source documents, applying principles of drama, and implementing the design principles into a project. Okay, so I want to work this through the lens of the Harlem Renaissance. Something I always do when I'm teaching is to include some sort of historical aspect so that while we're learning a concept, we're also learning something historical, but then we're also learning an art form. But you can probably tell from my mind map that that's just how my brain works anyway. I'm always doing at least 3 things at once. So we're going to do 3 things at once together. So a little bit about the Harlem Renaissance, in case you're not familiar with it or in case you haven't thought about it for a while. It was in the early 20th century, shortly before the big stock market crash of 1929. Now, it still sort of officially was over at that point, but did continue from a historical and canonical perspective in terms of the work that was created during that time. And you'll see here that there are a number of key figures from the Harlem Renaissance that by no means constitutes all of the people who were significant then, but essentially this was a time where Black folks in New York, and it happened in Chicago too. The Harlem Renaissance really only just wasn't in New York, but that was kind of how it came to be known. And a lot of folks were able to enter their work into the American canon through this movement. Another big movement that came later that this led to through the civil rights movement was the Black Arts Movement in 1965 to 1975, which also was an infusion of African-American work in the canon. So I teach about both of those kinds of movements and I tend to connect them together when I teach them. Today, we're going to explore a little piece of the Harlem Renaissance in order to think about how we can create interesting projects. So there's a progression that you can use when you do this work, and you can go in a lot of different directions. But I think the easiest way to look at it is that the first thing you want to do is locate and verify the primary source material. So you're going to want to do that outside of the gaze of your students, just because it's time consuming and it is a little bit labor intensive. But once you do it, you have certain primary source materials that you can just keep using over and over in many different ways. So you'll see on the right, there's all these different ways that you can create based on a primary source document. And so you don't have to keep going and looking for new documents or new sources, because you can do so much with the sources that you have. That's why I like to look at, let's verify the source material. Now, if you're teaching your students how to do that, you certainly can include that in the process. But if you're crunched for time, you're probably much better served just getting the information, securing that, and then introducing it to them after you chose it, and then giving them the opportunity to be creative with the work that they're doing. So then we will analyze in a way that is applicable to, like if you were in theater school and you were either an actor or a playwright and you were developing an understanding of what's happening in the narrative. That's how we're going to analyze the text. And then we're going to look at the different ways that you can explore the text and expand on the text and create a project that allows your students to demonstrate understanding through an artistic medium. So, locating primary sources. In this case, because we're talking about a number of things that are in the public domain based on the time that has passed, there are a lot of digital collections that exist. There are specific Harlem Renaissance collections, key figures, African American collections. And when you're looking at digital collections for your projects, you want to think about that. What are the various categories that a period or an idea or a movement or a concept can fit in, and how can you find primary source documents from that time frame? Luckily, the Harlem Renaissance was very well documented, and a lot of folks had the presence of mind to go to the Library of Congress, to go to the archives, to make sure to go to various museums. And even after people's deaths, their estates, their family members, and folks who represented them wanted to make sure their work was preserved for posterity. So that's a place you're going to want to look. There's a number of digitized collections, and collections are being digitized more and more day by day. So if 2 years from now you wanted to look for this information, there'd be even more resources where you could find them. Then you want to explore your teacher and student assets. A lot of times we have things in our own possession that are very useful. I have a number of books on the Harlem Renaissance. I have Souls of Black Folks. I have Langston Hughes poems. Those are things that not only you can use as a source for activity, but you can also use it to cross-reference. And I'll talk about that in a second. But when you're verifying online sources, you always want to cross-reference and make sure that what you're looking at is the real deal, so that you don't go in a direction of work and then you realize that there's some sort of inaccuracies, or it's not the official text. And then of course you want to confirm permissions. Now, obviously prioritizing things that are in the public domain, it saves you a lot of trouble. But if there's something specific that you want and that is held in a specific collection and it's really important, and maybe it's not available elsewhere, you can easily contact the rights holders and get their permission to use. So verifying your sources, as I mentioned before, you want to cross-reference. So you can look at the digital sources, and if you happen to have a library book or a book in your ownership that has that information, you might just want to check and make sure that what you're seeing digitally is pretty much the same as what you're looking at in your hand, because sometimes there will be a digital PDF or a digital online website version of a text that is inaccurate. I have seen that a number of times, and if you don't have familiarity with the content already, then you may not notice that it's wrong. And as I'm sure you know, people can put anything they want on the internet, and they can create a website that looks really official, and it could be a complete hoax. So you definitely want to make sure that you are cross-referencing as best you can. And just with the other primary source documents and secondary sources that you're aware of, making sure that those things check out and line up. You also want to check for discrepancies, check that metadata, and make sure, like, oh, okay, is this really Library of Congress? Is it loc.gov, or is it LIBREERRI of Congress, right? You got to make sure that there are not any discrepancies and that you're actually looking at a true source. And then consider, are you looking at the website of an accredited university, of a government entity like the archives or the Library of Congress? Are you looking at scholarly journals that you're familiar with and know are legitimate? Are you looking at official collections? Okay, so this is what we're going to look at today. I'm going to talk a little bit about it here, choosing a primary source for a dramatic monologue. So for this, you want to focus on text-based documents, because although many photographs, paintings, and images and things like that are also primary sources, those are things that can be left for interpretation. And your role here is to use text to then build out from for a number of different projects. And so it's best to look for materials that have a natural dramatic arc that we can create a dramatic moment out of. And then you want to prioritize the first person perspective. Again, this is for our drama-based analysis. Now I'm going to give you a quick preview of analyzing the text. You're going to look at the protagonist and antagonist relationship, objective, given circumstances, obstacles, tactics, and resolution. So the reason why I put protagonist and antagonist together is because a lot of times when people teach the protagonist, antagonist, sort of, they make it this binary when they're teaching it. In fact, as an actor, as a trained actor and as a director, I don't teach it that way, because an antagonist in one situation is a protagonist in another situation. When you are playing a character who is, quote unquote, the villain, you don't necessarily think you're the villain. You think that you're doing what you have to do for the reasons you have to do them, because you have an objective and you want to overcome obstacles with tactics and come to a resolution. So really, everyone is the protagonist of their own story. It also adds nuance to the idea of the good person or character and the bad person or character, that we all have many capabilities of doing good and bad things. And so that's the reason why I put those next to each other. Now, an antagonist can also be an idea. An antagonist can be something that is your hesitation to do something that's really important to you. You know, the antagonist doesn't have to be an actual person. The relationship is just what you think it is. It is who the people are to each other in a particular moment, what a person's relationship is to the overall environment. The objective is what you want. You've probably heard actors talk about, you know, oh, what's my motivation? That's their objective. The given circumstances, everything that's around you, the time of day, the space, everything. The situation that happened before, where you're on your way to, that's all given circumstances. Obstacles are things that get in your way. They could be brought on by an antagonist. They could be brought on by yourself. They could be random obstacles, but there are things that keep you away from what you want to get with your objective. And then the tactics are what you use to overcome the obstacles and come to a resolution. Pretty straightforward, right? This is what I typically will teach when we're either building a monologue or a scene, or analyzing a monologue or a scene. It works very well in theater, and I love to apply it to other things. So something you can do with a primary source text is you can read it aloud for comprehension first and foremost, and you can read it together. You know, everybody has their methods for reading with their students. I know for some people, they don't necessarily want to put their students in a position where they have to read aloud because some students are not at a level of reading fluency that feels comfortable and confident for them. And in that case, maybe the teacher can read it, or in that case, maybe there are students who typically read and everybody's comfortable with that. Or you can split it up amongst the students if that's something that you typically do. But that's a first step to just hearing the piece out loud. And especially with drama, you need to hear it rather than just see it, because drama is meant to be performed and experienced. So you can include practicing elements of performance. That's another level you can go to. Maybe if you're in a theater class, or if you have students who are strong readers, but you want to take them to the next level in terms of how they read. And you can look at these areas here: posture, movement, etc., that are basic acting qualities that they can include when they're reading. And then to take it even further, you can show them memorization strategies so that they can memorize the text and then perform it to create digital projects. So really quickly, we'll look at theatrical design as well. So these are the basic theatrical design areas: scenic design, lighting design, costume, hair and makeup, props, and sometimes projections. So I have costume in green because we're going to look at that area in particular in terms of a digital project. So if you were to look at a character from a costume design perspective, you could look at what's their name, what's their personality, their background, their emotions, you know, their relationships and things like that. Then for their given circumstances, what's the time period, weather, social class, etc. And then thinking about what garments you would put on them, right? And all of those things you think really deeply about because you want to serve the telling of the story. It's not just styling somebody for to look good for an event. It's how do you tell the story of who that person is and where that person is from, and make it make sense and check out with the rest of the narrative. And so just throwing in some images from my personal collection there, you can look at reference images for costume design, as well as if you can sketch costumes and things like that, so that you're creating this portfolio for costume design. That's just one aspect of design. But like I said, there are other aspects of design, such as scenic design, lighting design, hair and makeup, all of which are included in theater, but can be included in a digital project as well. So I'm going to stop sharing that because you'll recall that my PowerPoint wasn't agreeing with me, so I can't give you the full desktop. So please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. I know that I'm going fast, but I want to make sure that, hold on, I'm sort of covering this ground here. Please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. So now we're going to look at information literacy. So I'm going to reshare. So if you look here, this is an information literacy toolkit here that allows you to remind yourself. I know that everybody has high digital literacy here and information literacy. It allows you to remind yourself sort of what digital literacy is and how you can make sure that you are accessing materials and thinking about your interactions online and how you get information in an accurate way. So there's a little check your knowledge piece here, information literacy resources, and then a quiz. Finding reliable, relevant information. So this is a toolkit that I have that I can give you the URL to so that you can access that. If questions about that will come out of that. Now let's look at, for instance, one of our digital collections that I mentioned. So here we're at the Digital Public Library of America, and we're in a primary source set that was chosen by teachers and folks at the Digital Public Library. So this is called Visual Art During the Harlem Renaissance, right? You can cite it here. It's got the areas here where you can find them. And there are a few bits in here from the Harlem Renaissance. Now, like I mentioned before, we're gonna do a monologue project. So I would not choose a picture, even though these are some wonderful images of sculptures and paintings and photographs. I want to choose this, an excerpt from an oral history interview. And why that's because it is a first person perspective, right? So I choose this, I take a look at this. Now I've already read it, of course. And but in theory, you could think about, all right, you want to do a monologue project with your students to develop empathy, to give them a chance to practice their speaking and listening, to give them a chance to practice their reading, and also to help them demonstrate their understanding, perhaps even through a writing project around, let's just say, a Harlem Renaissance figure. So Archibald Motley this is actually from 1978, as you can see, but he's referring back to some earlier times. And so I wanted to use this to kind of reference him because he's not a well-known Harlem Ren figure. And he also doesn't believe in it in the same way that a lot of other folks believed in it as a movement. So I wanted to get a sort of a contrary perspective, excuse me, but also some good content for a monologue. So let's say you would download this whole transcript and you would read it. I pull up a document. Okay. Fine. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to pull up this document. Okay, so let's say that I downloaded that whole transcript and I read it through. The first thing you want to do is you want to take big chunks of the transcript and find places where you can pull a monologue. So what I did was I pulled 5 separate monologues, just big chunks of text where he's explaining something, describing something, talking about something that happened, whatever it is that he experienced over the course of his life. And this is actually a really good interview, so I was able to pull some different things. So let me make that a little bigger. So let's look at monologue 1. He talks about the progression of learning about art. So he describes what he starts with, what he's painting next, what he's drawing next. Okay, it's descriptive, but it's kind of theoretical. There's not really any action happening. He's talking about something that he was doing. So, okay, great. But then we look at monologue 2, which is a different chunk of the interview. And he talks about, all right, you see the second painting. It was in this particular exhibition. He talks about starting with his own family. Then he goes on to describe how he lived in a certain place. He went out to buy something at the A&P. He ran into a woman. She was very beautiful and he wanted to paint her. So he quotes what they said to each other. And then at the end of the monologue, they agree that they're going to meet and he's going to paint her. So that has a lot of potential, right? Because it's got an arc, a dramatic arc. It's got a beginning, middle, and end, and there's action there. So from a dramatic perspective, we can do something with that. So let's put a pin in monologue 2. So I would look at monologue 3. It's very short. It's still very theoretical. And just to sort of breeze through, you don't have to read these, but these other monologues are useful. When you pull something like this from a transcript of an interview, you want to grab as many big chunks as you can because you are going to potentially need the other monologues for other projects. And there's nothing wrong with holding on to those other monologues so that you can use them for something else. But the one that I'm going to choose is monologue number 2 because it's got the best potential for some dramatic development. So now I'm going to share monologue 2. So we pulled monologue 2. And I put his name there because now I'm turning into a dramatic monologue. I'm taking the text exactly as it was from the transcript of the interview. He's Archibald Motley, so I put Archibald here as it would be in a play script, and then I put the text here. However, I look at this big chunk of text and I go, all right, that's too much. I don't know what to do with all that text. Let me break it down. So I go over to ChatGPT and give it a prompt, and I say, ChatGPT, take this monologue and number each line as in a Shakespearean play. If you've ever taught Shakespeare and taught certain classical literature pieces that are written as literature, but our plays, a lot of times they are numbered because they are so long and because you are able to annotate when they are numbered in that way. So we're going to do the same thing with this one, right? So rather than having it in a big chunk like that, that's a bit overwhelming, we're just going to number it. That's going to give us the ability to do much more with it and keep track of everything and be able to have a conversation about it. In the same way we would if we were analyzing Shakespeare, we would talk about, well, in line 11, this happens, and in line 7, this happens, and those are the connections that we're making. So here, you can kind of really break down your questions about protagonist, antagonist, relationship, objective, etc. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you all look at this. Let's see if I can gonna push it down and see if I can get it on one page. Okay. So we got it right there. So I want you all to drop in the chat who you think is the protagonist of this monologue. Who is the protagonist of the monologue? Okay. Cat Frost says Archibald the painter. Thank you, Cat. Anybody else? Any other thoughts on who the protagonist is? Do we agree with Cat that the protagonist is Archibald? And so, okay, thank you, Jamie. And so, who or what might be the antagonist? Kat says his hesitation. I think you're right, Kat. I think his hesitation is the antagonist. There's not any particular. There's nobody sort of, tiptoeing into the scene or causing any kind of threat. But what is getting in the way of what he wants is his hesitation. So if we were to look at the relationship, what do we see as the relationship between him and this woman that he encounters? Any thoughts of that? Maybe potential client, potential partner in art, right? And you can look at the objective. Now, this one is a little bit more obvious. Yep, potential model, exactly. What's validator? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. What are two objectives we can look at? We've got two characters here. And as I said before, they're sort of the protagonists of their own story. Archibald, what's his objective? His objective is pretty clear. What is that? He starts off, he's going to the A&P to go pick up some things, but then exactly, Jamie, he now wants to capture her beauty in a painting. That's what he wants. And he starts to pursue that. He starts to do things to accomplish that. Those are his tactics. What is her objective? Does she have an objective also?
Is she testing him?
That's interesting. Sure. I mean, she does sort of test him at a point, but testing him could be considered a tactic. Why might she be testing him? What is she trying to get at by testing him? Okay, James is trying to relate to him by mutual person. Oh yeah, you said she's testing him. She wants to test him to confirm something. How safe is he? What's his intention? Yep. Lots of good answers, everybody. Thank you. And then the obstacles we can see are also this sort of the obstacles are like sort of the hesitation also, right? There's not any sort of obvious obstacle other than there's a little fear, there's a little hesitation. Edna, yeah, that's great. Edna is like a character witness because in mentioning Edna seems to introduce the idea of, okay, he's safe. I mean, somebody comes up to you and says, I want to paint you, I want you to come to my studio, You're not just going to say, oh yeah, no problem, I'm going to show up. So Edna Powell kind of allows them to say, oh, all right, this is a safe place. Maybe I can do this. He says he knows her well. She knows that Edna's been talking about him. She says, all right, she makes a decision, and you can see her make that decision. So you already in your head, you think about, okay, well, what's going to happen next, right? And so then we get to a resolution. Essentially, the resolution is our assumption. She's going to go be painted. The painting is going to be great. So you could read this for comprehension. You could then work on the things that I talked about earlier in terms of acting qualities. And then you can memorize, and then students can record and upload. But there's a lot of value in just starting off in the classroom doing this work. You can sort of arrange how much time you care to spend doing each step, because sometimes we're pressed for time and we can't do the whole progression, right? So what I'd like to show you is a response to the original monologue that is an option for a student activity. Is you can talk to the students about the same, what we did quickly, but what you can spend plenty of time doing is sort of unpacking this particular monologue that we created from a primary source document and turned into a dramatic moment for us to sort of re-examine it in a different way without changing the quality of the primary source document, right? And in a way that engages students and gets them up on their feet, gets them reading, gets them speaking and thinking. You can create feedback mechanisms for them. It gets them actively involved with the primary source document besides just reading it, right? So you can read that there. I'll leave that up for you. And I will invite someone who happens to want to speak today to read that for us in their character voice, right? We can look at posture, movement. We can't see you, but you can think about your volume, your inflection, and your tone. And we'll get an Ida May, who I just named after my grandmother. That's what I decided her name was Ida May, since she didn't have one. And can read that for us. Is there anybody who's willing to jump out there and do that? Of course, you don't have to come on camera. You can just read it so we can hear it, because that's an important part of the process, is to hear the text out loud. Who wants to try? And you don't have to be an Ida May to read it. You can be anybody in this room and you can read this particular response.
I'll play along with you.
Awesome. Go for it, Ed.
All right. You know, it's funny how life can throw a curveball at you when you least expect it. There I was, minding my own business, picking out groceries at the store, no less, when suddenly, out of nowhere, this man approached me. He had this look in his eyes, like he wasn't looking at me, but looking through me in a way. And when he spoke, it was with such sincerity, such genuine admiration. He wanted to paint me. Can you believe it? Me? At first, I didn't know what to make of it. I mean, who goes around asking strangers to pose for paintings? But there was something about him, something that made me pause and consider his offer. Then I realized he must have known that painter who Miss Edna kept going on about. She'd said his name was Motley. His reputation preceded him, you know. They say his paintings capture not just the likeness of a person, but their essence, their soul. I wonder if I'll end up in a museum someday. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to his studio and see what happens. I can't wait to tell Frank and the kids about this. It feels like a little adventure, you know, a chance to step out of my comfort zone and experience something new. Who knows? Maybe this painting will be more than just a portrait. It might become a piece of my family's history, a reminder of this moment when life threw me a curveball and I decided to swing.
Wow, Ed, that was really great. Excellent. So this is a great example of how now we've expanded beyond the original piece. Now we're imagining the life of this other person who we don't know anything about. Jamie mentions that it reminds them of an assignment where they had to create a backstory about a famous painting. And that's exactly it. The idea of going beyond what you have in front of you and imagining that world and really immersing yourself in it, but also practicing your reading aloud and practicing your acting skills and things like that. So great job. Thanks, Ed. So what we're going to do is going to stop sharing. Yeah, really sorry, y'all. My second monitor just decided it didn't want to play with me today. You know, goes that way sometimes. So we're going to try that activity. I'm going to pull up the original 4 that so you can see again what we have. Make it a little smaller. So this is the one we pulled and we numbered it, but then there are some shorter ones. And I want to grab a shorter one as an activity for us today. So this one right here, monologue number 3. And again, you have lots of different ways that you can use these materials to expand. Like I talked about before, you can create a podcast. You can do a whole activity where you design a play around. So if we had that monologue before and I created a response monologue, then maybe you have another character. Maybe there's someone who works at the A&P who saw the interaction. You create that situation, and then you create a scene from that. And then you could design the scene. You could even create an entire, excuse me, production around that. And you can record what you create because it's original, and you can put it on your digital portfolio to sort of share that with each other and with your other students. So let's take this short monologue here for you to look at. And I'm going to have somebody read that monologue, please. Monologue 3, the yes, I like to do that, all the way to there's a lot of truth in that. Whoever wants to jump in. Don't be shy.
Looks like Paul's got you.
I think Ed has made it almost impossible for anybody to.
He really did a great
jump
job. He really did.
But
really
I'll give it a shot.
All right.
Yes, I like to do that. I think that's what every artist has got to learn, is to compose like the old masters did with their music. And in paintings, they did the same thing. But these artists nowadays, I feel this way, and I'm very sincere about this. I think that every picture should tell a story. And I think if a picture doesn't tell a story, then it's not a picture. Of course, it's all right if you want to paint something decorative. Well, that's all right too. But that's a decorative painting. That's a lot different than doing something from the heart, something that's very serious. The old saying of Confucius, the Chinese philosopher, that a picture is worth 10,000 words, there's a lot of truth in that.
Right. So now you really get a sense of his philosophy. So in this case, you're getting an understanding of sort of his internal workings. And that's something that you can do with students, that you can really unpack and explore, respond to, expand. And I want to do an activity where we look at these monologues and expand on them even today. So, but I want to give you a chance to choose either one. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. So the one that we had before, where I had it all numbered in the other, actually, I'll grab it and put it in the other one that way. Okay. So now we have the 2 monologues there. And we can start with this one, but we know we have the other one. I want to take a look at this. There we go. And explore how we can create a response to it, similar to the one that I created. So there's two ways that we can do this. In one instance, the response I created was from the other character, if you will, the other person in this exchange that we happen to find in this monologue. And so I made up something from her perspective, but I did use the context of the moment to drive my writing. Another way you can respond to that is to create a monologue that is sort of another version of the one that we pulled from. So like that you're sort of interpreting it to a deeper place, or maybe you're continuing the day you imagine what happens when Archibald goes back home and how he prepares to paint her and what he's thinking about, how he gets his supplies together and things like that. So I know there were a few of you. I don't know like where everybody is, so I can't see because I can't see you. So I want to make sure that I know what you have available. Just give me a quick drop in the chat, like if you're available to do the activity, because I want to know how many people I have who can do the activity. And it's fine if you can't. I just, this is our interactive part, no pressure. But I at least want to know, I know who's in here. And this, yes, the second monitor is my antagonist. That is the truth. Because when I tell y'all, it's still locked up. That's what's crazy. Like I'm constantly trying to just unlock it, and it just won't. And if I actually, hold on, definitely my antagonist. I had it all. It was so pretty. Everything was ready to go. But I guess that's just, April 17th, 2024 didn't turn out how I want it. But we're here, we're having fun. Okay, sweet. So I have a few folks who want to do this, and that's fine. If you aren't participating, you can feel free to just listen and watch, which is okay too. Oh God. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna since there are three of us, we're gonna stick with the one because there's no need to spread it out. So this monologue that we have here, let me know, is it easier to work with the numbered lines, or do you want the chunk?
I think the number lines help me.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, they help me too. I feel like it's, sort of easier to break it down.
In the chat, numbered lines.
Okay, number lines work. Awesome. So let's take a look at this. And like you would work with your students, let's walk through it. So I would say we've got the first up to through line 6, where there's kind of more exposition, more backstory, if you will, than we might need for this. So let's say I would take all of that where he's just filling in information. Even like one day, sometime after I was married, sometime that this picture was done, he's talking about this picture. What if we cut that and just said, all right, I had an apartment, a studio over on Langley Avenue, and we just started there. And then we went down to when she said, she told me all about you. I'll be at your place tomorrow morning. So we can maybe focus more on that part, because this is the part where most of the action happens, right? So I'm going to challenge you to look at this text and start thinking about how you would create a response to that. Would you create a response from her perspective? I mean, she speaks in this monologue in theory, so it doesn't have to be from her perspective. Would you create a response from your own perspective going forward in time and talk to him from there? What are some ways that you can respond to this text?
I'll take your first idea to take the same what happened and from the woman's perspective. So
Okay,
take
I like that.
I those are the kind of books I like, is you take the same scene or and then have it carried forth by totally the woman here's perspective.
Okay, awesome. I love that. I love that. What else? Does anybody else want to take it from the woman's perspective?
I'll go along with that. I was also thinking about an onlooker
Mm,
just
okay.
because of line 11 right there, where he keeps walking past her. I wondered what it would be like to see that as a third party. You've got this guy, walking into walls because he's captivated by this person and keeps finding excuses to walk past. And I wondered if that would be an interesting perspective. Though I do like taking the woman's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Like both of those. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That is interesting. How many times have you been out in the world and someone's looking at you and they're just looking at you, and there's a point where you're just like, what's wrong? Is something up? What's up? And they're just like, no, I just felt like I knew you from somewhere, or wow, that's a really nice shirt. Or, where the person is just trying to figure it out and maybe they're not even thinking consciously about how they might look to others. So I think you're right. An onlooker would be that would be a different perspective looking outside of this exchange and maybe watching the exchange all the way through and realizing, oh, okay, it's all right. He seems safe.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about Edna and the shorter monologue from Archibald, how that spoke to his philosophy. So I wonder, like, what Edna and Archibald's connection is that she felt the need to express it to Ida May.
I like that. Yeah, she was already talking about him before Ida May saw him. So yeah, that's interesting. That fills in something really interesting. I like that. Thanks, Kat.
It's also interesting to me that this person immediately recognizes this person that they don't know based on Edna Powell's description,
Mm-hmm.
which means that this person must be pretty distinct or interesting themselves, that just like, oh, Edna Powell, don't you? I know exactly who you are, with no conversation before that. And so I really wondered about what like, who is this person that could be so socially awkward as to walk past me 4 times?
Uh-huh.
I know who you are. Like, I other people have been talking about you.
I like that. Nice. I like the way the more you all take a look at each line and sort of open it up, you start to make new discoveries. And that's, of course, one of the things that's so great about this, reminding ourselves that this is an oral history project. It's an interview transcript that was taken to preserve this artist's viewpoint, experiences, perspective, uh, life's work. And yet we're able to ground this in a narrative and create a moment that we can build from in a dramatic way that will engage students. Okay, so based on those excuse me, based on those ideas, I want to give us a quick, I'm gonna put time on, we're just gonna say 4 minutes of writing time. And we're gonna just do a quick writing exercise to explore what it means to pick up that story, to carry on that story, right? So think about the perspective you chose, either, you know, if you're typing or if you're writing, just start from that person's perspective and see where you go. And I'll start the 4-minute timer right now. We'll do that for 4 minutes. And during that 4 minutes, I may be able to fix my monitor. Let's see. Okay, we got about 30 more seconds, so you can wrap up those last couple of ideas. Okay, and that's 4 minutes. So I would love to know what that process was like. Writing exercises are always so interesting when it comes to this, because sometimes you're hesitant when you start. You're just like, oh, you know, today I don't feel like doing this right now. And then you do it, and and there's just, I don't know, you start to, you don't want to stop. I do this workshop with police officers, and they're often very hesitant to write at the beginning of our trainings, and then by the time I get them writing, they don't want to stop and say, hey, we have to move on, and they want to continue to write. So very curious how you all felt first off during the writing exercise.
I continued with the idea of taking it from the woman's point of view, and it flowed. I took it all the way to her being a grandmother, bringing her grandchildren to see this portrait of herself. So I just went through, I just went all the way to her being a grandmother.
I like that.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
That's great. So you just kept going through time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. What else? Who
I
else?
was thinking about from Edna's point of view. Basically, Edna's out doing her day, but she gets home and she's messages from Ida on her answer machine wanting her to call her to talk about this. I didn't get farther than that, but I was trying to think about, someone earlier was saying, like, you get the same story but multiple points of view. So I was thinking about what would Edna think when she gets a call from this friend about this interaction? Almost like she wants to talk with her that night before she goes there the next day to get another safety verification, like one of those like types of things where she wants to be safe, right? I was thinking about that. What would Edna think of the situation?
Okay. I love the all these other perspectives being brought in, and as we paint and open this world.
Took me a little bit to get started.
Yeah.
Yeah. The blank paper is intimidating, but then once I got going, I was okay.
Okay, good. That is true. Sometimes you're not sure where to start, and then a lot of times I'll tell people just keep going. Like you said, once you get going, you're okay, right? It's just keep going, even if some of what you're writing doesn't necessarily make sense or it doesn't connect, just to keep going. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I tried the perspective that Ed suggested, writing something in the voice of a bystander who's witnessed this, and it was interesting. Midway through writing it, I realized I don't actually know who I'm imagining as the audience for this. Is this person just talking to themselves, or is it a day later, say, or later that day, and they're telling a story to somebody else about what they saw on the street? And I realized it worked a lot better, I thought, if it was the latter, right? And this person has to figure out how to describe what they saw in a way that will be meaningful to somebody who's listening, even though they really don't know what to make of what they saw. That kind of became the point. Like, what was that? I saw that. What was it? I don't know.
I like that. That's interesting. As you all sort of talk about the journey that you took to get to where you got with the piece, and how you made decisions about whose perspective that you focused on. It forces you to ask questions about that world, but it also forces you to answer them, because you have to go in a certain direction. You have to make decisions about the story. So you're having to answer them. And so, using inquiry in any sort of process like this is nice when you feel like all you're doing is asking questions, but it's very empowering to be able to investigate the answers to them. And in some cases, create the answers to them for yourself. Okay. Oh, okay. So Ed says the onlooker couldn't hear anything, but he saw the body language. So that was, sometimes that can tell you the story that's accurate, and sometimes you can make different assumptions. So perhaps the onlooker made correct or incorrect assumptions about that moment. So, no, that's great. So one of the things that I want to explore next is, okay, so I'm glad I got a few of you warmed up, got a few folks sharing how you wrote your pieces. But now I want to know if anyone is willing to share their piece. That is the next step. See, Ed's got a lot of detail. So, I mean, again, I would love to hear these. I don't want to put pressure on folks to share, but it would be really great if we could have a couple folks who are willing to share their pieces, because then it'll allow us to sort of go through our different steps of how you can use this. And even as we listen to this, right, you listen to the inquiry that's happening, you listen to the way that we're investigating this world. Again, just beyond this one transcript about an artist recounting something that happened many years ago in his life that we are now expanding and exploring in a meaningful way. Just a couple folks. Now, if I get more than a couple, that's spectacular, but happy with a couple. Because this is a part of it too, with students, getting them to share out. You can tell, right, when you hear it versus when you read it, it's much more engaging. I'm much more engaged when I hear you all read. And something that I do often with students is, I'm asking you all to read your own work for the obvious reasons, but often I will have students read each other's work. And I find that it's very valuable because now the pressure is not on you to sort of be good and do, you know, be super creative. It's just you're handing it over, much like playwrights do, and someone else is producing it.
I'll get started with mine. In my youth, I had a distinctive look. A few times I was an art model. They painted my large eyes and smooth skin and wide mouth. I know I liked seeing myself portrayed as exotic. One artist fell in love with me. It didn't last long. The painting hangs now in New York sometimes, and I take my grandchildren to go see it. They don't recognize me, but I recognize myself and remember being young.
Wow, that's beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Good, Lisa. Okay, so hold on to that. Now I want to hear someone else's. Yeah, that was really powerful. This is and again, this is one of my favorite parts of this process, again, because you get to share these beautiful stories, you get to hear people's beautiful creative ideas. Whoever else would like to share.
I'll go.
Awesome.
Right. From the corner of the store, I watched a curious scene. A man, a nondescript man in appearance, had an intensity in his eyes circling the aisles. Each loop brought him closer to a woman standing by the window, and he was clearly struck by her beauty. He passed once, twice, 3 times, and then finally a 4th time. Each pass was a pause, a tilt of the head, and an admiration of her face. Finally, he approached her. His words were lost to me by the noise of the store, but I heard her laugh through the air, a nervous laugh that spoke to her surprise and delight. She questioned him, her body language shifting from guarded to open, her hands gesturing animatedly. And then, as quickly as he had entered her orbit, he departed. His step was light, a skip in his stride, and the joy of the encounter propelling him forward.
Very nice. Very nice. I loved getting that perspective. Now I have 3 people who I feel like I know more about. I feel like I have a relationship with these people, and I feel like I understand that story better in a way that if I was assigned just to read that transcript, I would have breezed past this maybe and just went on, you know, through the text. Okay, I'm looking for, when did he do his painting, and what was this era, what was that era, how does he feel about the Harlem Renaissance? This really allows us to drill down into a singular moment. Really beautifully done. Anybody else? I want to give anybody else a chance who. Okay, good. So that's 2. So now that we've had 2 share outs, I want you to think about what, and let's just use those. We will use the original monologue that we have up here, and then we'll use the monologue about Ida May, who goes on and thinks about what it's like to be young. And then we'll think about that onlooker who was in the moment and couldn't hear everything that was said, but did hear the nervous laugh from Ida May. What could we then potentially create just from those three ideas? Any thoughts on that, on what we could make? What could that potentially become? Could it maybe become a scene, a dramatic scene? We've got 3 monologues. All we would have to do is add a little bit of stage directions, which would be in a play, just sort of describing what happens, where we are, what's the setting, what people do, like if someone's walking by or if someone's laughing, and then the dialogue, we could create a scene. And from that, we could, in the classroom, read or even memorize and perform and share. But in the digital space, we could create a radio play in the form of a podcast. Of course, we would assume that we would do it like a podcast, but we could create a podcast that's a radio play. That's and you can go in different directions with that. It could be based on his life, Archibald Moxley in particular, and just expand out from there. And maybe it's a dramatization of times in his life, things that happened in his life where you can just continue to research. Or it's sort of, I think to what Lisa was saying, when you take source material and you start to build on it, kind of like fan fiction, if you will, where you're starting to tell deeper stories based on that. And now you've recorded this digital record of your student work. A lot of young people nowadays are starting podcasts in school, just, like topics that they're interested in, things they want to talk about, things they want to explore, which is great. And so one of the advantages to that is that they're familiar with the concept now. It used to be, I would say maybe like 10, 15 years ago, podcasts weren't something that young people were super into. It was definitely a little bit more, for folks who want to listen to latest events going on or some sort of serial story and things like that. But nowadays, a lot more young people are using podcasts. So that's definitely one way that we can digitize the work that we're doing in terms of this arts integration approach. Another thing, like I said earlier, is talking about the costume design. So now that I've mentioned that, I want to look at that in terms of, and y'all know the screen situation, so I can't really share multiple things at once, but I will, oh wait, but I can drop things in the chat. Hold on, I'm gonna pull that up and I'll just give you the design principles here. So give me a second. Okay, so I'll take that, put that here. So I'll remind you that those are the areas of design in theater. And all of those can be digitized. And it's interesting because theater is such an analog medium. But when you're using it to explore these kinds of ideas, you have this boundless world of creating digital assets. So if you looked at scenic lighting, costume, of course, which is still capitalized because that's how I had it, hair, makeup, props, you can look at all of those. You can start with costume or you can look at other ones. But if we were designing this, or if we were, you can look at it, if you were designing it for theatrical production and you wanted to share those design principles digitally, you could do that. But you also could do sound design. And that's what I didn't have here. You could do sound design for a radio play. So thinking about, let's put Ed and Lisa's monologues together with the main one. What kinds of sounds might you include in a radio play of this storytelling moment? what sounds would there be?
In the original, there's walking and the store sounds. So that would be a starting point, trying to capture that time. I imagine a lot of car noise.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to get the sound of the A and P, maybe an old announcer or the overhead announcer.
Uh-huh. Maybe one of those
The
clunky cash
intercom.
registers. Yeah, the
Yeah, that's right.
intercom. A nice clunky cash register, right?
Maybe
Making,
actually counting back change.
oh, I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, right.
I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, yeah, because and it's interesting you say that, right? Because okay, you want to tell a story of a time long past. How do you capture the sounds of something so long ago? You know, none of us was around in the 1920s, so how do we tell that story? Well, I mean, you could go to the old like Get Smart recordings. I want to say the those old the cash register. Yep, you're thinking about, you can get one of those old cash register sounds. You could go to some of those old radio plays and listen to some of the sounds that they use and get some ideas. And those were in a distinct style. So then you can think about, okay, do I want to do it in a particular style, or do I want it to just be, you know, like a regular podcast or just storytelling? But yeah, absolutely. You want that cash register sound. You if they're walking down the street, maybe you want to have maybe you want to have Archibald walking down the street and then going into the AMP. So you want to have, maybe there's one of those little bells on the door, you know, when you open up a door and it's like clinks up against the door, that kind of distinct sound. And then maybe there's a dog barking outside. There's a lot of sound design that you can add to something like that. And you could, in theory, like I said before, create design that wouldn't necessarily be seen in a radio play project, but would allow students to continue to imagine and build the world. Because the more that they can build the world, the more they can immerse themselves in history in a way that goes beyond just sort of looking at the images or breezing through the text, right? So for the A&P employee, I believe, well, I think they're an A&P employee. Ed, is the person employed at A&P, or are they just shopping there, passing through? I'm trying to remember.
I didn't think that through.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, so let's decide who are they? Do they work there?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, so maybe they got home from work and talked about it, or you know, shared it with someone they cared about. And what does that mean? Are we now in a different setting? Would we move on? You know, a radio slash podcast piece would allow us to explore that in a deeper way. You can go to a lot of places with just sound than you can visually. And that's one of the things where I listed possibilities of like a documentary or a short film. But from a cost perspective, those are going to be more expensive. Now, a lot of us have these in our hand that can shoot in 4K, and you can shoot a decent film on your iPhone, right? But you also would have to do a lot of editing to make all the sound line up with the video, and to, you know, there's a lot of drama there. So an easy way you could do it is audio, because then all you're concerned about is the sound. You're not having to line up any sort of visual with sound. You're just using sound, and you're able to be really creative in terms of getting people's imagination going around the story. So that's a really great way that story can be told. So another thing that I mentioned was just the development. When you talk about true arts integration, is sort of just the development of performance skills of students. So if you had a reason, if there was a theater class that you were working with, or if students were just at a place where they were able to move to that level, then you could assess them on their performances, and you could give them those parameters I mentioned in terms of how they use their voice and how they use their body in the performance of the monologue. And that adds another layer of assessment and of work that they, oh, Thanks, Paul. I love that. Yeah, some great sound effects. So that's exactly it. You want to be able to, pull in sound effects and create a world that you're sort of telling this story. And the thing about digitizing a lot of this work, I'll stop sharing. So the thing about digitizing a lot of this work, right, are the rights. Like when I talked about before, wanting to make sure the work that you're pulling is in the public domain if you can make it. Like sometimes it's just not, because you're dealing with something that hasn't it hasn't been enough time passed, or whoever owns it is protecting it, and you may have to pay for the rights to use it, and you don't have those funds. So a lot of times you'll have to shift over to other resources, but it's great to use those resources I mentioned earlier, like the Library of Congress and things like that, that have free use of a lot of these things. But you want to be careful about how you use things when you're putting them up digitally on a website, especially if it's available outside of the students in your class, because of rights and permissions. And okay, Jamie, talk about public domain license. Yes, thank you. Oh, Jamie's out of there. Jamie, did you want to speak on that, or?
Oh, no, I'm just making sure that people know, whether it's an image or sound or anything, to make sure it's public domain. I mean, even if like certain times you try to even post to Facebook, oh no, you don't own rights to this music, they actually screen it. So just be very careful on that. And, just make sure you're using shareable content.
Absolutely. Agreed. It's so tricky. And when you're doing a project that includes a whole lot of different types of media, sort of like you mentioned here, Jamie, if it's like an image and a sound and a this and a that and a painting and a photograph. And sometimes we get lulled into thinking that certain things are permissible to use because we've seen them a lot. And that's not necessarily the case, because plenty of sites and plenty of folks do projects and use materials that are not in the public domain, or that do have restrictions, and they still use them. And so you want to make sure that what you're doing is above board, and you want to check permissions. Now, one of the big challenges that's happening now is with AI, and you, of course, have been talking about that. Today, we talked about Chat GPT. I know you had a Chat GPT session earlier, and that will be all kinds of AI will be in the conversation as we continue through the conference. You want to think about the fact that there's not really any regulation there. We're still trying to figure that out. It's moving so fast that we cannot keep up with it. And by the time we figure things out, now there's even more technology there. The Creative Commons search was taken over by the WordPress project. Okay, what do you mean, Ed?
So the Creative Commons being those licenses that you can put on media or sound or different things. They used to have a search engine, and the Creative Commons kind of decided that they couldn't keep supporting their own search engine anymore. They didn't have the developmental capacity to do that. And so they actually kind of moved that project to be under the WordPress developers. And WordPress has continued, they rebranded it. They now call it Openverse. But if you go to openverse.org, you can search sound effects, images, audio, all that are licensed with a Creative Commons license with them, so that you might have the permission to create a derivative work and everything. It takes a little bit of savvy to be able to do that, because you have to look at the license and make sure the license includes the ability to make derivatives. So you're looking for, public domain, CC BY, those more permissive licenses, but it's growing to be a very good resource. And I especially like that you can get sound on there as well as images now. And so I just put in like the cash register sound, and I got a whole bunch of results that are all openly licensed.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. It's so complicated and hard to figure out, right? And things change, like you just said. There's a rebrand to Openverse, and I didn't even know that, right? I was familiar with Creative Commons, but yeah, when somebody gets bought out, or if somebody just hands all of their materials over to someone else, what now are our permissions, and even creating derivative works can be prohibited in some cases, right? We might think, well, I'm not using the actual work, I created something that's based on it, so what's the problem? And in some cases that's not okay either. And so I think one of the things that I feel is important too is when you're in an educational environment, you know, it's our responsibility to teach the students that as well, because they're sharing things in their own time, and this is a great practice for them to think about. You know, we're just sharing things left and right, not thinking twice about it, and we don't have the permission to share a lot of these things. And of course, you know, as we were talking about AI a second ago, and using sort of generative imagery, and how that has got a lot of artists upset, because their work is what's being used to train AI to generate new original, if you will, works. But okay, that's taking away from them, and that's pulling from their intellectual property. So it's a very interesting and complicated process. But I think like what I showed before in terms of the digital literacy and information literacy is an important place to start, to just start at a baseline of understanding how to navigate this huge wealth of information that we have out there, and how, you know, it just becomes overwhelming, but how you can take one primary source document, drill down into that, take a little chunk of it, and build something from there. And like I had the list of monologues, so I pulled 5 monologues, if you will, that you can continue to build on. That's a technique you can use where you don't have to keep going back to the internet every day to feel, okay, I got to do something new for my students, I got to figure out a whole new project. You can still create from the same sources. So, and thank you guys for dropping these resources for open source materials, the sounds and all of the other assets in there. So any questions about all that? Y'all did a really great job with the interactive part. And one of the things I love to talk about, right, is that connection of theater, which is such an analog form, with the digital world, with the internet world. Okay, I'm gonna dropping my email in there if anybody wants to get in contact with me, has questions, or wants to connect. Oh, good, Lisa. Yeah, I definitely wanted to add some new ideas to your toolbox and get you thinking about ways that you can both be very dynamic in person with students, but also do projects online.
Thank
And
you
I
so
will say-
much. Oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to say such a nice contrast. Previously, it was computer programming, so the two together really were made a wonderful, wonderful foil for each other.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm glad y'all enjoyed it. You know, the interactive sessions are always tricky online, right? On Zoom, but I always expect that even though not everybody will jump in, that everybody can get something from it, because somebody will jump in. So.
And thank you for persevering through your technology
That's right.
issues. I appreciated this afternoon.
It really, and it's still locked. I'm just like, all right, you know what? I'm just gonna shut it all down. I'm sure I can turn it back on later, and it'll.
You know, it added drama. You provided drama as well as talking about drama as a tool. It was great.
I did.
So wonderful, so engaging, and you've given us so many tools and so much to think about. Fabulous.
I really appreciate the opportunity. This was a lot of fun. And, you know, like I said, I dropped my email in there. So anybody wants to reach me, feel free. And you'll have a great rest of your day.
You too. And thank you so much again. And thanks to everyone who joined in.
Yeah.
We'll see everybody at 10 o'clock tomorrow. We'll do our conference opening. And then I'm really excited for both the lightning talks and the presentations that are coming up. Tomorrow's featured speaker is Chris Gilliard. So I'm excited for that as well.
Great lineup for the next 2 days.
All right.
Hope to see you all there.
All right. Good day.